So you've probably thought about this before. I know I thought about it for a long time. But what exactly is it that makes certain books so great? That they last a length of time, hence becoming classics. That they have an evergreen appeal no matter what generation of readers takes them on. What is it that just leaves something lingering in your soul? Now, I want you to do an exercise for this because this is one of the fundamental, maybe even the keystone of all literature. I don't know, you're something up for debate, maybe have an argument down below. But do this right now. This will actually add to your appreciation of this video. So think of some books and narrow them down to 3, 2, or even 1. They don't necessarily have to be your favourite books, although they will likely be up there with them. But they're books that have left an indelible mark on you. So just take a brief time, just pause this momentarily, think a little, and write down which books left a real deep impression on me, especially as an adult. And then look at it and ask yourself, why did it leave that impression? What was it about this book? What came through that moved me so much that it will never leave my mind? I'm going to give you some time just to go away and do that. So how did you get on? What things did you jot down about the books that you felt have had the longest lasting impression on you, that you think are truly marvellous? You may even notice that you've got other books that you enjoyed the story more, but this one left a big imprint. Now, it may be you read them when you're young, and so it opened your eyes to seeing the world in a new way. I think we all have those kind of books from our youth. But there may be books you read when you were older that just stopped you in your tracks, took your breath away. Why did they? And with the classics, why do certain ones hold on so long? It's quite an odd thing to try and describe, isn't it? But this is what I really want us to do as we're adventuring through literature. Take time to just stop and consult your own thoughts. You have an enormous reservoir of experience in your life. The experiences you've had in your life add up to more than a PhD's worth of knowledge. Okay, it may not be organised, it may not be on a specific point, but the quantity of knowledge we've all took in through experience and interacting with the world is massive. And then books, our experience reacts with books that we read. And you can get some insight by just bringing your experience, your ideas to bear, and being open to receive observations from an author that you've not thought of, or maybe contrary to your opinions. But I'm going to share with you now the one secret ingredient that makes certain books vastly superior to others. It's not plot, it's not that slippery something called style, it's not clever use of techniques. All of these can be involved, and sure, the great books tend to have them nailed down, but this is the secret ingredient to books that last. The authorial urge. The authorial urge is when a writer isn't just writing because they want to make some money. It's not they're writing to pass the time of day. They're not writing for a cheap thrill. They're writing because they have a deep inner urge to share their message. That message may be their personal story. So in this month's book, of course, The House of the Dead, although it's fictional, it's come from Dostoevsky's own experiences in being sent to Siberia and the things he learned. And he wanted to put that out there into the world. What he saw in Siberia changed his opinion of convicts, of people. It opened his mind to the variety of characters, to the almost criminal nature of the justice system. There's a lot, and I know you're all thoroughly enjoying this. I've had so many comments on that last post. So, carry on. But I want you to think about what was burning in Dostoevsky's chest that he just had to write it. That's the authorial urge. And when an author has to share a message, when it churns them up so deeply, and this is, I use this word a lot, but in this case I really mean it, so viscerally, that they either are overawed by the sublime of living, or they're gleeful over just the joy of being or our abilities as humans, or frequently over sad or irked, annoyed, angered by something in society, that they have to share it. Do you know, those are the books that will last the longest, because it shines a light on reality. And it's a common thing said about literature, that the best literature is closest to reality. But what an author can often do is, because you can construct a imprint or an imagined reality which looks just like ours, they can get in and maneuver it and highlight problems within the world we see. Now I'm going to show you something very fascinating. I recommend you do this as well. Online, it's on my phone, but I'm going to put it on screen for you. But online, there is thegreatestbooks.org, and just have a look through the top part of the list. We've got Don Quixote there. Let's go down. Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels, Tom Jones, Clarissa by Samuel Richardson, Tristram Shandy, Emma by Jane Austen, Frankenstein, Nightmare Abbey by James Love Peacock, The Charterhouse of Parma, Count of Monte Cristo, another massive great one, Sybil by Flora Schreiber, David Copperfield, Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, Vanity Fair, Scarlet Letter, Moby Dick, Madame Bovary, The Woman in White, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, a serious favourite, The Way We Live Now by Trollope, Anna Karenina, Daniel Deronda, The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, I know we sped through those, but you recognise lots of great works in there. Interesting that at the beginning, they were primarily, Don Quixote is the 17th century, and then the next bunch were from the 18th century, very early works. But with the exception of one or two, I can't speak to Black Sheep by Georgia Eyre because I've never read it. But Woman in White as well, a bit of an exception in that list. Did you notice that there are some commonalities? The top bunch, so Tom Jones and Don Quixote and Tristram Shandy, Gulliver's Travels, do you notice they're all satires? They ridicule something that is popular in the day. Clearly the authors have been looking at society. This is a common thing, by the way. Satire really, really needs a revival, because it is one of the best ways to rip open the facade or the pomposity and idiocy sometimes of the way society acts. But Don Quixote, for instance, you've got Cervantes there, and amongst other things, what he pulls apart is the romantic ideals of the day, the stories and plays that are told that are all so airy-fairy, all troubadourian love, and he sort of tears them down, making the knight-errant Don Quixote, who's off to do his quest for Dulcinea, this woman he's never met. This is so troubadourian, this is so Petrarchan in what love is supposed to be. Funnily enough, simultaneously, Shakespeare is pulling this same idea apart in Romeo and Juliet, which is also a shredding of this overly romanticised love. But you've got Tom Jones. Tom Jones, look at the take on morality, the role of family, the setup of society in its corrupt and, what's the word, hypocritical way of doing things. Did you know Tristram Shandy, the Life and Opinions of, was a mockery of the biographies of the day? Because Tristram Shandy tries to tell his story, and by the end of the book has hardly told you anything about himself, yet it's supposed to be his biography. And there's these constant diversions. Now, it's also very funny as well at times, but it's a ridicule. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels was a little bit of an argument against individualism and for sort of a social contract, not the social contract, but that people should work as a mass as opposed to the individual, focusing on what's best for society. But he also took aim at the aristocratic setup across Europe and the fallings out they all had and the fights they'd go and have with each other for the most stupid things. But there were others. So do you see there? Actually, the authors have seen something in life and they want to expose it. Had they just set out to just write something funny, it would have sold, but it wouldn't have lasted. There's something biting in the satire that we still recognise today. A bit harder with something like Gulliver's Travels, a little bit harder with the 18th century because times have changed. But once you get into it, you'll recognise a lot of the characters. And, you know, again, the cant that's involved in the world is still out here today, you know, with all of its virtue signalling. And you see that in those books. And it's held up for mockery. I should really do a whole video on satire. It would be a great experience or experiment. Mind you, would you like to do that in the second part of the year? Let's take 3 books on satire, perhaps, and see what we can learn there. Just leave your comments down below. But there were other books on there. Robinson Crusoe. Now, that's not a satire. Robinson Crusoe, we read it last year, didn't we? And I know a lot of you said how much you were surprised at the book. You thought it was going to be a kid's book, but it turned out to be far deeper than that. Did you hear Defoe's message in that? The authorial urge. It went beyond just a story of a man trapped on an island. Okay? It was an exploration of the capabilities of the individual. In fact, on the political side, he was the opposite of Jonathan Swift. He wanted individual rights, not to be dominated by government and having to conform to certain things. But through that story, he also explores what is truly meaningful for a human being. What do we need to exist? And he's confronted with his own racism, isn't he, in that book? Because he's a slave trader, but then when he has Friday on the island, he feels bad about it. He doesn't completely reform, which could be in the favour of the book because it's trying to be real, but you can see his dilemma. Do you see? Defoe had seen something in the world. He was seeing people climbing to the middle station and then thinking, we can be rich, and going for it and ruining themselves. Be content was the message of Crusoe's father. Be content with the middle way, neither too poor, neither too rich. You know, give me neither poverty nor riches is the proverb. There was a deep-seated motivation for doing that book. Anna Karenina obviously is going to be on that list of 100 books. I heard someone, they recently made a comment on my channel, and you know, I don't disparage the comment at all. I can somewhat see on the surface level where the person's coming from, but they just said Anna Karenina is just a retelling of Madame Bovary by Flaubert, only much more boring. It's got similarities, but it's not the same at all. I mean, there's no Levin, for instance, no character in Madame Bovary that matches Levin. Also, the reason for Madame Bovary and Anna Karenina's situation is different. The motives, well, not the motives, the underlying passions that have got them there are very, very different. So it's not the same at all. But you see, with Karenina, Tolstoy wanted to explore something. He had something he had to say to society, because Anna Karenina is based, I think it's on his sister, who ended up getting a divorce. And the difficulty to get the divorce with the church, and the way society looked at her as opposed to her husband. He explored that, but he he simultaneously explores maybe why her life led to that situation, because it's set in the city and society and all that kind of stuff, and putting on airs and graces, compared to Levin, who tries to understand what real happiness is, what real purpose is, by going away from the city to the peasants and trying to learn in the land. You know, Tolstoy was always striving to understand life. And of course, he developed his own ideas, and I would say in Resurrection, his third book, he gets a little more didactic in the way he's trying to express not so much an exploration but his own opinions. But War and Peace and Anna Karenina, he has something he's seen and just has to share with the world. Do you see? That's what makes them last. So, giving an example of that, let's look at some of the books last year. And what I want to just mention is an extra feature. As I pondered on this, something came to my mind. If you were going to bring up and have this urge to share something, there is a touch of the renegade about you, a touch of the revolutionary, a touch of the brave. Because you can't write a book like that suddenly wakes everyone up, that exposes something, whether it's satire or whether it makes a plea for a certain cause which is being overlooked, like divorce in the case of Anna Karenina. If everyone already had your opinion, there'd be no need to write the book about it. And if you wrote it, everyone would read it and they'd agree with it and they'd think, oh, lovely story, but it just wouldn't necessarily last. You need that fight against what is commonly held in the day to get an impassioned story which captures the ideas and the thoughts so well that they will echo for all time. Please, argue with me in the comments. I may not be able to answer them all, or where you agree with me or where you don't, but there's a lot to this, and it helps you appreciate why certain books stand higher than others. So, for instance, in last year's reading, I'll start with this year's. Next month, we've had House of the Dead this month, which I can't wait to do the first chapter video, the introduction. Masterpiece in how to do narration and how to introduce a book. Something I'd never spotted before that he does so well. But the book itself, you can tell it's so effortless the way he writes it. You can tell he's got an earnest message inside. My quote book that I keep notes in, I keep quotes from books as I read, is filling up rapidly with quotes from this. Little insights like convicts are called unfortunates by the peasants. Crime is called misfortune, not crime. That's very insightful. And Dostoevsky wants to share that with the rest of society, who simply look down on convicts and say, there's more to this than meets the eye. Next month's is the highly passionate Emily Bronte with Wuthering Heights. This has to go in for one of the worst book covers ever, by the way. They're trying to sell Wuthering Heights by using the Twilight rage that was going on at the time. But I'm looking forward to your reactions or comments about Wuthering Heights. The sheer pitch of passion that Emily Bronte puts into her characters. What is she trying to say? What is she trying to get out there? Because the pen almost runs away with her and almost derails the plot, you could say, in some places. If you've read this, you'll know what I mean. You can tell that the force of this book and why it's endured comes because Emily Bronte felt something so deeply that she had to share. And of course, we'll talk about it more next month. In April, we've got The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler. Some people say this changed literature. This launched, the new ideas for the 20th century. But he had a message. He was looking at the Victorian society and could see something horribly, horribly wrong about it, like many people did, but he had to share his thoughts. And he didn't write it according to what was popular, which is why he never got it published when he was alive. It was only published later. As things began to change, people have found that his voice, he had captured what they were beginning to see. And of course, it took off from there. So again, the author's urge. But look at the books we looked at last year, and we're going to look at an exception in these books as well. To a greater or lesser degree, they all have this authorial urge. How well executed, that's more down to the talent of each author and for our own personal opinion as readers. But let's look at some. So I think the first up was Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. Dickens had the great knack of actually having a deeply felt motive for writing and an ability to please the popular reader. And we talked about his use of the humours, which keeps you engaged. If you haven't watched that video, go back and look for it. It's Charles Dickens' What Are the Humours or something like that. Now, in Great Expectations, he's got a message. He has seen, as have many others, but he's deciding to put words to it, that a real gentleman is a gentleman of the heart, that it's the content of a person's character, not the outward appearance, not the forms and dress and all that, or the level of wealth that actually makes a gentleman. You know, he anticipates Martin Luther King by a century. It's not the colour of the skin, but the content of the heart kind of thing. But he then draws it out in his own very idiosyncratic way. Pip goes through a story which most people would love to have back in his day. Poor suddenly inherit money. Everyone wonders about that. Everyone thinks it would be wonderful for them. But Pip learns a lot in that book. And, I know Dickens isn't everyone's cup of tea, but if you read this last year, maybe this year, at least next, go back and reread this book. Because there is a lot in here that you will see the author, part of its power is because the author genuinely has a message to share, an observation, rather than just a story to tell. It's the secret sauce. It is the fire within, the stone that burns brightly. Another one we did, not as good as Great Expectations perhaps, was Mary Barton. Also did Sybil. Now, the reason for Sybil and Mary Barton last year was because I wanted to help you get a bit of a backdrop of what was going on in Britain. It's not just what we see on the TV with the Jane Austen films and the Dickens of London. It's the working classes, the mills up north particularly. But Mary Barton struck a chord amongst the community of the day. And what was unusual about it, it struck a chord at both sides of the aisle. The poor felt represented. The workers in the mills and the coal towns felt understood because, of course, Mary Barton's husband, he was a vicar, and they were constantly addressing the needs of the poor. But even the owners of mills and the higher class in society appreciated this book because, I don't want to give anything away for those who have not read it, but for those who did, you know that she tries not to come down in favour of one side or the other. She tries to appeal for the necessity that the only way to solve things is for both sides to hear each other, to see the difficulties both sides have. How appropriate is that for today? If you were to take this book and take out mill owners and poor people and put in two different categories of opposing opinions today, it would still work to a large extent. And that's why this book has lasted. It's got a weak ending, in my opinion, a very weak ending. I think that undermines it from being... I think it was Tolstoy that said that English literature has some great houses, some great mansions in its corpus, but no palaces like the Russian literature. And I understand what he means, and this would be a great house. Technique has let it down a little bit, but nonetheless, you feel the sheer power of the plea of the message of Elizabeth Gaskell in this book. And I think that's what gives it such stickability. It makes you hold on to it. And there's scenes in my mind that I can still remember. And it's not the end scenes. It's the actual confrontation scenes. They're the bits that stick in my mind. The prostitute beneath the lamppost. That sticks in my mind. Because that was what she was really interested in. She wanted to share the story, the plight of the poor, but also the position of the landowners. We've talked about Robinson Crusoe, so I won't bother talking about that. How about 1984 by George Orwell? I know a lot of you, again, were impressed by this book, not having read it before, and thinking it was depressing in how prescient it is of today. Why did it open you up? Why did it leave a mark? Even if you didn't like it as your favourite book, and there is a video coming up either on Patreon or YouTube, I haven't decided yet, on you don't have to like all books to read them. 1984 can leave you feeling a bit deflated, but it does it so well. And how does it do it? It's because Orwell is a keen observer. He writes this in 1946. Now you've got to think, this is when the world feels it has beaten totalitarianism. The United Nations has been set up to bring world peace and a global order and all that kind of stuff. And yet a year later, Orwell is already sensing amongst political movements, amongst ideas, the move towards totalitarianism in a bigger way. I mean, how did he? And he had to share what he thought. Using technology, he recognized its role in shaping people. Propaganda had become mastered in the Second World War. Started in the First, mastered in the Second World War. The Ministry of Truth, the ultimate propaganda machine. He could see it coming. And that's why his words have entered the lexicon of today's youth. Not today's youth. Again, why does it last? Why is it a byword for totalitarianism? Because of the authorial urge. And it takes a renegade, doesn't it? When everyone is lauding the United Nations, he stands up and says, we're on the heading to more authoritarianism. That's an out-and-out rebellion against the consensus viewpoint. But when you feel that strongly, and you see life that clearly, you write great works. Couple more, and then we're going to come to a bit of an unusual one. An anomaly. The Painted Veil. Now, the Painted Veil, the authorial urge in this drives from the fact that Maugham heard a story that he just had to flesh out, that he had to write. Just watch my review on this book if you don't know what I'm talking about. But on top of that, he begins to explore the role of forgiveness and charity and faith. I don't know if Maugham was that religious. He never strikes me as such. But the sisters in the convent, the way Kitty has a feeling for them, an admiration that they've got something more that she doesn't know. She's lifting the painted veil. She's stepping out from just the world she wants to see and imagines is there, which has been painted in front of her, to actually seeing other cultures, seeing other people suffering difficulties, answering to her consequences, being disillusioned. You know, I'm sure Maugham feels this deeply. Maugham has watched this a lot. That's why this book's so good. It's the magic source. He has a message that he has to share. Room with a View, E.M. Forster. The narrow strictures of Edwardian society. The fact that rather than form your own opinions, you have them pre-formed by what is correct and acceptable. But then waking up to what genuine love is, what genuine beauty is, what genuine living is, having a room with a view rather than a dark, cloistered, smoky study to live your days in mentally. Again, there's the passion you can feel inside this book. It sparks at times, doesn't it? But there is one anomaly. The Woman in White. This is a marvellous classic. But is this one that you could say Wilkie Collins has something he's seen that annoys him or elevates him or whatever that he just has to share? I struggled fitting this into that category, which demonstrates there's no hard and fast boundaries in literature. As soon as you try and make a hard and fast boundary in literature tends to go and break it somewhere. But as a general rule, I think this is what underpins the classics. Now, there is an observation in this that Wilkie Collins does bring out, and actually, I won't say he labours it, but he repeatedly comes back to it, repeatedly. But like Dickens, he knows how to write for the popular reader. Popular readers love sensational literature. At this time, even Dickens began to go in that direction with Our Mutual Friend. People were writing for commercial purposes, and I think that's the biggest detriment to popular literature. I'm not saying all popular literature is just junk. It's not. There's some phenomenal pieces of work out there, loads of which I love. But it's predominantly written for commercial, and that means the majority won't last in time. In fact, the majority of the books written in the 19th century, the sensationalist novels, they don't last. They haven't lasted because they don't have an authorial urge. It's just tell a good story. But The Woman in White has lasted. Partly, in fact, maybe mainly because of the brilliantness of the plotting, the almost perfection of its execution, its style, there's one little piece that I don't like in it, the coincidence, but other than that, it's so brilliantly put together. But there's a depth to this. Wilkie Collins sees the difficulty of women in society. They don't have rights to their own property. A man has rights to their property when they're married, and they're stuck. She wasn't considered, was she, in this? It went straight to her guardian, whether she would marry or not. She could have turned it down, but it would have been a problem. You were expected to do as you were told as a woman. The woman in white in the asylum, she may not have been mad, but because a man had said so. And that's what's so intriguing about this plot. I think it's what makes it so gritty, is it gets our sense of justice up. We want them to win. One, because they're the protagonists, so you want them to win. But two, there's a sense of real injustice that these poor girls are at the whim of men. In fact, if there was perfect equality at that time, this book wouldn't have been able to be written. You'd have to have found some other reason to have conflict. And that is something I feel adds to this book. There is an inner drive to it. It may not be quite as deep as the others, or maybe it is deep, but it's wrapped in such a good story that you don't notice it much. But it's there. You feel that the writer also has an inner urge to write mystery. They are very addicted to the sensation of the thrill and mysterious and suspenseful and horrifying. Like Agatha Christie as well, it's almost like she loved to think up things that would scare her and she had to share them. And I think that's what gives, because many critics will say that Agatha Christie's writing isn't particularly fantastic, but there's something about it that's mesmerising. And maybe that's what it is. She had to share this story. She was so excited by the plot. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't just necessarily built on a collection of tropes stuck together to get cash. There's a deep love for it, a deep desire to share it. And by the way, if you want to see how sticking tropes together can make a book, just go and watch my video on YouTube on the 8 aspects of Gothic literature. At the end, I write an introduction to a book. And it was off the top of my head. It took me 20 minutes. I just used elements from that video and just stuck them together into a bit of narrative. And you see how quickly you can make a story that could be pleasing. I've had lots of people say, could I finish it? They really want to hear it. I have no idea what would happen in that. Not plotted it out. But the point is, people bought into it, but there was no authorial urge. If I wrote that, it would never be a lasting book. You would never get a classic from it. There has to be a depth, something driving. And hunt down what that is in your favourite books. Can you find it? Can you sense the passion, the earnest need to be heard by the authors of the books that you read? As we go through this month, next month with Wuthering Heights, April with The Way of All Flesh, keep your eye out for the author's urge. What is it they are seeing? What is the message they just have to tell? Sometimes they can't quite crystallize all of it. It's sort of a central node of observation or a passionate belief about something, but they haven't been able to get to the end of it, so it becomes fuzzy at the edges. Wuthering Heights is like that. You may sense that a little bit in House of the Dead, but you can tell he is sharing his experience. This is a book that's not just, oh, this will be interesting for people, the life of convicts. He wanted you to hear things. He had observations and he wanted people to change their mind. We will also look at other books like Cold Comfort Farm and Three Men in a Boat, which are, funny. And so they're not as dramatic and soul-churning. However, there is an inner urge of the author to share the sheer joy, the joie de vivre of living, the oddities of our existence just have to be put down on paper. And the passion for what is fun and what is human comes out in those. We're going to look at, I know it's about the power of observation that we're focusing on those months, but always keep the author's urge, because these books are ones that have become classics. So Down and Out in London and Paris. A Movable Feast by Hemingway. And then we've got Madame Bovary in June. Again, when it comes to that, what was the author's urge? Somewhat, not quite a full satire, but somewhat satirical. But he's got a very astute observation, which is not a new one, but he paints it in a unique way. The style of his observational skills is brilliant in Madame Bovary. But the actual motivating idea wasn't new, but it needed to be said again. And he said it with real vim. And that's what made Madame Bovary last and become sort of a cornerstone of the realist movement. So, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've loved talking about it. I'd love to know your thoughts below. You can add ideas as well. But the point is, in our literary adventure, if anything strikes you, take the time to just sit back and think. It's the most rewarding activity. Think. Go for a walk. I walk regularly. I've got a walk that takes me 40 minutes in my area, if my back can hold up. And I'll go around thinking, why did that strike me? Does it remind me of anyone else? What do I know about another book that sounds like this, which I know something about the author? Is there a connection? Oh, I'm learning their experiences. I'm learning to see what they see. I'm learning to try and hear the message they have. If something strikes deeply, find out what made it strike deeply for you. And sometimes something may not strike deeply. It's just something is remarkably well written. Ask yourself, why is that so well written? Why is it so pleasing? That's how you'll begin to unearth nuggets for yourself and share them with others here. On a final note, this year I want to make this a bit more of a book club. I know the majority of you, this was all mentioned a long time ago, are just happy to have the videos that I make. You've got it for that reason. But I know some of you probably want to get more conversational. And I can't possibly monitor and answer all comments because if you look at my stats, along with YouTube, I have like over 1,000 comments coming in a week, and that's too much to deal with. But have you any ideas about how we could set up something for those who wanted to, maybe after I've done the review for the book, because not everyone wants to get involved in discussions. But for those who do, what ideas would you have for doing that? A Discord group I've thought of. It's not the easiest thing to manage. I couldn't be present there much, but I can open it where we just lay out chapters, headings. If you've read anything within these chapters, it's safe to watch these, read these comments, because otherwise there'll be spoilers, so on. We used to have a monthly Zoom where whoever wanted could attend, and there'd be a discussion about the book. And if there's too many, if it's like 20 people, so not everyone can get in, and we could either split that into separate rooms of 10 each, or if you're there just to listen, but you want to listen, but you don't, not feeling comfortable to speak, that's fine as well. But I know through that method, a lot of you will get to know each other and your experience of reading will grow even more. And I think you actually very much grow into a book club. Once you've experienced it, you see why they are so popular. So let me know your thoughts. That was a bit garbled, but I do want to bring it for you. I want to give you the best that I possibly can. Obviously without running myself ragged, but I know you're all wonderful. You're also kind to me when I'm feeling ill, because I get that a lot. Anyway, that's enough waffling. I'm so pleased to be with you all for this adventure for the rest of the year. And until the next video, which will be coming quite soon, I wish you joy in your reading.